What chance does a young woman have in a place where mercy dies quicker than rain on dry dust? The stagecoach rolled into Redemption Flats under the noon sun, and Clara Bennett stepped down like a ghost rising from the ashes of her old life. Her dress was faded, her shoes worn thin, and her single, small bag held the last pieces of a world that had already slipped through her fingers. 19 years old, with sky-blue eyes shadowed by grief, she looked like a wildflower trying to survive in cracked earth. The town saw her at once. Whispers floated through the dusty heat like flies, buzzing from the saloon doors to the general store porch. Lone girl, no family, no man, easy prey. The women pulled their children close. The men leaned in their chairs, eyes sharp and hungry. Redemption Flats was not kind to strangers, and it was even harsher to young women with nowhere to go. Clara felt all of it, the stares, the judgment, the silent prayers that she would keep walking and not stop in their town. But she had nowhere else. The drought had taken her family farm, then sickness had taken her parents, and the bank had taken everything else. This miserable patch of the West was her last hope. She lifted her chin and walked toward the general store, determined to find work. On the porch across the street, two men watched her arrival. Clayton Morrison stood heavy and smug, boots polished, belt lined with silver. He owned the Double M Ranch and half the town's soul. Greed was carved into the lines of his face. When he looked at Clara, it was the same look he gave cattle he meant to buy cheap and work hard. Beside him stood Ethan McGraw, taller, quieter, broader in the shoulders. His face was set in a calm, unreadable expression, but his gray eyes followed Clara with something colder than interest, recognition. He knew the look of desperation, because once, years ago, he had worn it himself. His ranch was the biggest in the territory, and his life had been stripped down to silence after fever took his wife and son. He lived like a man half alive, half gone. Morrison nudged him. "Fresh prospect," he said, smirking. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The simmering hatred between the two men was already thick in the hot air. Clara stepped into the general store. The door shut behind her with a soft thud, but the tension inside was anything but soft. 4 cowboys in Double M belts turned toward her. Their grins meant trouble. "Well now," one drawled, leaning on the counter. "You lost, darlin'? Or just lookin' for the kind of work we can help with?" The storekeeper suddenly found his counter very interesting. Clara swallowed her fear. "I'm looking for honest work. Cooking, sewing, cleaning." Laughter burst from the group. "Honest work? In Redemption Flats?" Another cowboy sneered. "Only thing honest round here is a man sayin' what he wants." He stepped closer and flicked the sleeve of her dress between 2 fingers. "Pretty girl like you shouldn't waste her time on chores. Morrison's always looking for help back at the ranch." She knew what he meant, what they all meant. Heat rose in her cheeks, shame, anger, fear. "Please let me pass," she said quietly. The cowboy blocked her path. "We're just talking." At that moment, the door swung open again. The room turned to stone. Ethan McGraw filled the doorway, broad shoulders casting a long shadow. He didn't shout. He didn't reach for his gun. He just looked at each cowboy with those cold, gray eyes. "That's enough." The cowboys stiffened. Everyone knew Ethan. No man in the county wanted him for an enemy. "We ain't doing anything, McGraw. Just having a chat." "Your chat is over. Get out." Silence stretched tight. Then, one by one, the cowboys stepped back and slipped out the door, muttering curses they didn't dare speak too loud. The store fell quiet again. Ethan turned to Clara. She stood shaking slightly, her hand clenched around the handle of her small bag. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice softer now. She shook her head. "No, sir." "Thank you." He studied her for a long moment. She looked worn but not weak, afraid but standing straight. He admired that. "You said you're looking for work," he said. "Yes, sir. Anything respectable." My ranch needs a cook and housekeeper. The job is hard. The pay is fair. You'll have your own room." His voice held no suggestion, no ugliness, only fact. "If you want it, it's yours." Clara stared at him. A real job. Safety. Dignity. After weeks of hunger and fear, it felt like a miracle. "Yes," she whispered. "I'd be grateful." Ethan nodded once. "My wagon's outside." As she followed him, the storekeeper called after her with a warning in his voice. "Miss, you be careful. Morrison won't like this." "You're taking sides you don't understand." Clara paused. Across the street, Clayton Morrison stood glaring at her, his face twisted with cold fury. Then she saw Ethan waiting beside the wagon, still as a stone, but solid as a mountain. She climbed up beside him. The moment she did, she knew her life had changed forever. Not because she took a job, not because she left the town behind, but because she had stepped, unknowingly, into the center of a war between two powerful men. And she was now the spark that could set everything ablaze. The McGraw Ranch stretched across the land like a quiet kingdom carved out of hardship. As the wagon rolled through the wooden gate marked with the simple burned M, Clara felt the world shift beneath her feet. This was not a place built on greed or loud promises. It was built on sweat, silence, and something far steadier than anything she had known lately. The barren scrub outside town gave way to rolling grass, sturdy fences, and cattle grazing in calm order. The ranch house stood tall among cottonwoods, its stone walls weathered but proud. Cowboys walked between the barn and bunkhouse, stopping to stare at the newcomer riding beside their boss. Ethan brought the wagon to a halt and climbed down. "This is Clara Bennett," he said to the men gathering near the porch. "She'll be running the kitchen." The cowboys nodded, respectful, curious, a little cautious, but not unkind. Silas, the ranch foreman, stepped forward. He was older, solid, with a mustache that drooped as if it carried all his years of stories. "Ma'am," he said with a gentle tilt of his hat, "I'll show you to your room." Her room was small, clean, and quiet. A single window looked out toward the yard. After weeks of fear and uncertainty, it felt like sanctuary. She began her duties the next morning. Before dawn, she lit the stove, swept the kitchen, and set to work. The men filed in for breakfast, expecting burnt beans and bitter coffee like usual. Instead, they found warm biscuits, sizzling bacon, fresh eggs, and a pot of coffee that smelled like heaven. They stared. Then they ate. Then they stared again. In their silence, Clara saw something softening. She was no longer a stranger. She was becoming part of the rhythm of the ranch. Days passed. Then, a week. Clara cleaned, cooked, mended shirts, and restored order to Ethan's ledger books. She found a strange peace in the steady tasks. Slowly, the cowboys warmed to her. They greeted her with nods, joked lightly, and treated her with a brotherly kind of respect. But Ethan was different. He was always near, but never too near. Always watching, but never weighing her down. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice held quiet kindness, and his eyes carried a depth she could hardly read. She felt drawn to him, not because he had rescued her, but because beneath his silence she sensed a man carrying a weight even the strongest shoulders shouldn't have to bear. Something about that touched her heart. Something about him felt familiar in her loneliness. One afternoon, the peaceful routine shattered. A young hand named Billy tried breaking a half-wild Mustang. The horse reared, the boy fell hard, and chaos erupted. Clara ran toward the commotion. Billy lay pale, clutching his arm twisted wrong. The cowboys hovered, lost. "I can help," Clara said, kneeling beside him. Silas blinked. "Miss, you sure?" Quote, "I've tended worse." She cleaned the gash on his head, stitched it neatly, and reset his dislocated arm with firm, practiced hands. Billy cried out. But when it was over, he sagged in relief. The men stared at Clara with a respect deeper than any she'd earned through cooking. Ethan watched from behind them, his eyes locked on her, not surprised, but something close to relieved, like a man seeing the sun after a long, dark winter. From that day on, Clara was no longer just the girl Ethan brought home. She was family, but danger brewed far beyond the ranch fence. Clayton Morrison had not forgotten her. He had not forgiven Ethan, and he was spreading rumors through town with poison-tipped words. Clara's name was dragged through the mud, called things she'd never imagined. They said Ethan brought her to the ranch for reasons no decent man would. They said she was a temptress, a thief, a stain on the territory. The lies slithered through Redemption Flats like snakes. Silas brought the news back each trip. "Boss, it's getting bad," he warned one evening. Ethan's jaw clenched. His gray eyes turned stormy. Let them talk. "But words can do damage, bullets cannot." Clara heard the whispers from the cowboys, their nervous glances. The worry in their voices when they spoke of town meetings and judgmental wives. She felt the weight of shame she did not deserve. She had fought her whole life for dignity, and now this land was trying to strip it from her again. One night, she found Ethan standing at the cold fireplace, staring at a silver-framed photograph. A woman with gentle eyes, a baby in her arms. Clara stepped back. She shouldn't be there. That was a world she did not belong to. But he turned, catching her. His face closed, his voice cold. "The fire needs wood." It was a dismissal, a wall, a reminder that she was only an employee, a reminder she felt like a slap across the heart. Clara curled into her small bed that night, wiping silent tears and telling herself not to care for a man who didn't want her heart tangled with his. But the hurt did not fade, and neither did his eyes when they lingered on her. A few days later, everything changed. A Mustang broke loose in the corral, trapped and panicking after a rope snagged around its leg. Cowboy shouted. Dust filled the air. The animal struck the fence again and again, wild with terror. Before Ethan could reach it, Clara walked into the corral. Everyone yelled for her to stop, but she moved slow, gentle, steady, whispering to the frightened creature until she was close enough to cut the rope free. The horse bolted to safety. Silence dropped over the ranch like a blanket. When Clara walked out of the corral, Ethan stood there, staring at her, like he'd never seen anyone like her in his life. "What you did was dangerous," he said, voice tight. "I know," she answered softly, "but it was right." Their eyes held. Something fragile and powerful passed between them, a spark neither could deny anymore. But out on the trail, someone else had been watching. Clayton Morrison. He sat on his stallion at the edge of the cottonwoods, hatred simmering beneath his smile as he turned his horse and rode off. His next move would come soon. And it would be ruthless. The warning came sooner than anyone expected. Clara walked to the small creek one quiet afternoon to gather mint for the evening meal. The sky was clear, the ranch peaceful, and the world felt briefly safe. But when she stood to leave, a shadow fell across her. Clayton Morrison. He sat on his black stallion, eyes sharp and hungry. "Miss Bennett," he said as he dismounted, his voice smooth but cold underneath. "Working hard, I see." Clara's heart thudded. "I'm gathering herbs." Morrison stepped closer, cutting off her path. "You're wasting your time out here. McGraw's ranch is no place for a young woman. There's talk in town. You're being judged for things you didn't do." Clara stayed still. "People say what they want." "I'm offering you safety," he continued. "Come work for me. I'll give you a warm house, a clean room, fine dresses. You'll live better than any woman in this county." His meaning was clear. His offer was a trap. "No," Clara said firmly. "I'm not leaving the McGraw ranch." Morrison's smile faded. His eyes darkened. "You're making a mistake, girl." He leaned close. "You will regret this." He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving a trail of dust and dread behind him. Clara ran back to the ranch, fear lodged deep in her chest. 2 days later, the news arrived. Silas rode back from town with a face pale as chalk. "They've called a town meeting," he said. The council means to drag Clara's name through the dirt. They want her out of the territory." Ethan froze. Then he looked at Clara. "We face them together," he said. The day of the meeting, the saloon was packed. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and judgment. Clara stood beside Ethan, her shoulder brushing his arm. She wanted to tremble, but his presence kept her steady. Mayor Abernathy banged the table. "We are here to discuss the moral situation at the McGraw Ranch." Morrison rose immediately. He spoke with loud piety, painting Clara as a stain, a danger, a woman without virtue. He accused Ethan of impropriety. He called their home a threat to the territory's values. People murmured. Some nodded. Others shifted uneasily. Then Ethan stepped forward. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You want to talk about character," he said, staring straight at Morrison. "Let's do that." He told them about Clara's hard work, her courage, how she saved Billy, how she worked without complaint, how she earned respect through actions, not gossip. "She is under my protection," he finished. "Anyone who attacks her attacks me." Silence fell. Then Clara stepped forward, small, trembling, but unbroken. "My name is Clara Bennett," she said. "I came here with nothing but hope for an honest life. I worked hard. I harmed no one. If you judge me for what I have done, not for rumors someone else spreads." Her voice didn't waver. "That is my character." Even the most judgmental wives lowered their eyes. The room shifted. The tide turned. Mayor Abernathy banged the gavel again. "This matter is closed." Ethan and Clara walked out of the saloon to a town that no longer looked at her with hate, but Morrison watched them leave with murder in his eyes. That night, vengeance came. Under the cover of darkness, Morrison's men cut fences, scattered cattle, and burned a threat into the ranch gate. The next time will be blood. 2 days later, it came. A midnight attack shattered the quiet of the ranch. Gunfire exploded through windows. The barn caught fire. Horses screamed. Cowboys rushed to defend the home. Clara grabbed a rifle and took a position inside the house. "Stay low!" Ethan shouted. But she stayed by his side. Bullets tore through walls. Flames lit the yard in orange and red. Billy and Silas fought from the bunkhouse until the fire forced them out. Billy didn't make it. Silas fell defending the door. Clara saw Ethan raise his pistol at a shadow. And she saw Morrison, aiming straight at Ethan's heart. She didn't think. She threw herself forward, knocking Ethan aside just as the gun fired. Pain exploded through her shoulder. She collapsed, gasping. Ethan caught her. "No," he whispered, terror flooding his face. "Clara, stay with me." Rage consumed him. Cold, absolute. He rose, eyes blazing. "Morrison!" he roared. The battle stopped. The world narrowed to 2 men. Morrison and Ethan faced each other in the burning yard. Ethan advanced with the steady force of a man who had already lost enough. Shots rang out. Sparks flew. Men scattered. And then, chaos claimed Morrison. A terrified horse burst from the burning barn, slamming into him with brutal force. The outlaw fell and did not rise. Silence fell at last. Ethan dropped to his knees beside Clara, gathering her into his arms. "You're safe," she whispered faintly, but Ethan shook his head, his voice breaking. "No, you saved me." Dr. Evans came at dawn. The bullet had passed clean through her shoulder. She would live. The town changed its tune after the battle. Supplies arrived. Apologies came. And people spoke Clara's name with respect. Weeks passed. The ranch healed. The barn was rebuilt. The men stood taller. The land felt alive again. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Ethan stood beside Clara on the porch. "The Reverend asked about us," he said quietly. "I told him I planned to ask for your hand." Clara turned, eyes shining. "You already have my heart," she whispered. "You can have the rest." They married under the open sky, surrounded by cowboys and townsfolk who now understood the truth of her courage. The life ahead would not be easy, but it would be theirs. Months later, they planted a small rose bush near the house, a hardy breed meant to survive harsh weather. Clara pressed the soil around its roots and smiled. "It's like us," she said. "Strong, tested, still blooming." Ethan wrapped an arm around her and pulled her close. No more shadows. No more running. Their home stood tall, and their love stood taller. And in the quiet heart of the Wild West, where storms often claimed more than they spared, Clara McGraw and her husband built a life that nothing, not drought, not gossip, not violence, could ever take away.